Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter series is one of the brightest phenomena in literature and film. But let's be honest, Harry is far from a perfect hero. He often made mistakes and frequently got himself into trouble simply because he stubbornly stayed silent or acted alone instead of sharing with friends or trusted adults. Today we'll recall the most striking moments when Harry could have acted smarter and safer. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The Dursleys. Let's begin with the very earliest, the house where Harry grew up. The humiliations and bullying from the Dursleys were no secret, and this went on for years, and yet it's surprising that Harry never directly asked for help. Even if he didn't want to complain to Dumbledore, there were other adults, Minerva McGonagall, or at least someone from the Weasley family. It's hard to believe they would have ignored it. But instead, everyone stayed silent, Harry about his suffering, and the rest about the fact that they clearly saw it all. Number 2, Dobby's attempts to save him. The second part of the story, the Chamber of Secrets. Dobby desperately tried to keep Harry from returning to Hogwarts, but his help turned into full-blown disasters. A blocked entrance to platform 9 3/4. Instead of explaining things to Mr. Weasley, Harry and Ron flew to school in the Ford Anglia, a risk that could have ended in tragedy. And what about the Quidditch match against Slytherin when the bewitched bludger nearly killed him? And again, no talk with the adults. Number 3, the mysterious voice. That same school year brought another mystery, the strange voice Harry heard within the castle walls. Even for the wizarding world, this was highly unusual, and Hermione or Professor Dumbledore would have certainly taken it seriously. But Harry decided to keep it a secret, and the result was new dangers for himself and his friends. Sometimes silence can be far more dangerous than confession. Number 4. Peter Pettigrew on the Marauder's map. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry noticed a shocking inconsistency. On the Marauder's map, he saw the name of a man everyone believed dead. Pettigrew was wandering the castle, and only Harry saw it. Yes, he shared this with Lupin, but that's where it ended. Yet it would have been far more reliable to tell, for example, Professor McGonagall. Perhaps then the tragedy at the end could have been avoided. Number 5. Punishments under Umbridge. His 5th year brought Harry a new enemy, Dolores Umbridge. From the very first lessons he was in her bad books, and her punishments took twisted forms. The special quill that carved words directly into his hand became an instrument of torture. And here again the question arises, why didn't Harry tell? Hermione outright urged him to. Even if Dumbledore was busy, McGonagall would never have ignored such cruelty. But once more, Harry chose silence. Number 6. The visions. Starting from his 5th year, Harry began receiving terrifying dreams and visions. Only after the attack on Mr. Weasley did he decide to reveal the truth. Of course, his hesitation is understandable. He was afraid he wouldn't be believed or would be seen as possessed. But if he had confessed earlier, training with Snape and the protection against Voldemort's intrusion could have started much sooner. Number 7. The decision to save Sirius, and finally, the most painful episode. The vision in which Sirius appeared to be captured in the Department of Mysteries turned into disaster for Harry. He believed Kreacher, and relying only on his friends, walked straight into a trap. And yet it could all have been prevented. He needed only to share what he saw with Snape or another member of the Order of the Phoenix. But Harry chose risk, and that mistake cost him the person dearest to him. Number 8. The Triwizard Tournament. Harry never put his name into the goblet of fire, yet when it flared and spat out the slip, no one believed him. "Harry Potter," Dumbledore read aloud, the hall falling into stunned silence. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 17. From that moment, Harry was bound to the tournament. He could have begged harder, demanded McGonagall, or even Madame Maxime intervene, insisting on the truth that he had been forced into a deadly game. Instead, he accepted the decision, a 14-year-old standing among champions far older and more prepared. The first task with the dragon showed how absurd it was. Harry faced a Hungarian horntail alone, its wings tearing up the ground, its fire scorching the air. He survived by summoning his firebolt with Actio. Only clever, yes, but reckless. Any misstep would have left him in ashes. At every stage, the tournament revealed itself as a trap designed to kill him, yet Harry kept his silence, trusting luck and skill more than the adults around him. By the end, when Cedric lay dead and Voldemort returned, the price of that silence had become unbearably clear. Number 9. Dumbledore's Army. The story of Dumbledore's army feels inspiring. Students gathering in the Room of Requirement, Harry leading them through spells that would one day save lives. Expelliarmus echoed through the secret chamber as sparks flew, and Neville grinned at his first real success. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Yet the truth is sobering. These were children training for war in secret, while adults like Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and even Dumbledore himself could have offered real guidance. Harry never told them. He believed it was his responsibility alone, and the weight of that secrecy put every student in danger when the inquisitorial squad uncovered their meetings. It is true that Umbridge's reign and the Ministry's propaganda justified distrust. But Harry had allies who would have supported him. If he had confided in Sirius, the man would have risked everything to guide him. Lupin, with his calm experience, could have helped shape lessons beyond Harry's own abilities. Even Dumbledore, distant though he was, might have acted differently if he had known his students were preparing for battle in secret. Instead, Harry let the secrecy define the army. What began as hope became another example of how his silence cut him off from those who could have helped most. Number 10. Voldemort's Return. The graveyard scene at the end of the Triwizard Tournament left no doubt. Harry watched as Wormtail performed the ritual, and Voldemort rose again, pale and whole, his red eyes burning. The Dark Lord had returned. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 33. Harry escaped with Cedric's body and brought the truth back to Hogwarts. Yet when Cornelius Fudge arrived, Harry's words were brushed aside. The minister refused to believe a child, even as Dumbledore stood by him. Harry could have pressed harder. He could have described every detail of the resurrection before the gathered professors. He might have demanded Fudge look into his memories using the pensieve, or even shown the duel that had forced Voldemort's followers to reveal themselves. Instead, he sat silently while the minister called him confused and hysterical. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 36. The opportunity to turn disbelief into proof slipped away. That silence cost the wizarding world a year of denial. While the Ministry painted Harry as a liar, Voldemort gathered power in the shadows. The prophecy, the attacks, and the formation of the Order all played out under a cloud of mistrust. If Harry had insisted on evidence, if he had refused to be dismissed, the world might have prepared sooner. Instead, the boy who lived was forced to live as the boy no one believed. Number 11. Snape's Secret. Harry's hatred for Severus Snape ran deep. Every lesson in occlumency was a battle, filled with insults and humiliation. Snape barked, "Clear your mind!" while Harry clenched his fists, feeling more anger than discipline. The lessons were meant to shield him from Voldemort's influence, but Harry resisted. Instead of admitting how much the visions consumed him, he stayed silent. He let pride and resentment blind him to the truth. Snape was the only one who could teach him. The signs of danger were everywhere. Harry's scar burned more often. His dreams of the Ministry corridor grew sharper. Sometimes he even felt Voldemort's emotions. Triumph, fury, hunger. These were warnings, but Harry didn't tell anyone. Hermione begged him to work harder in occlumency, but he shrugged it off. "I don't like occlumency," he told her bitterly. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 26. His refusal to open up turned the lessons into wasted hours instead of protection. The final blow came when Harry's anger exploded. In the middle of a session, he broke into Snape's pensive and saw the memory of his father bullying Snape by the lake. Shock turned into shame, and after that moment, trust was impossible. Snape ended the lessons, saying coldly, "We will no longer be having lessons together, Potter." Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 28. Harry never explained how much he was struggling. He never asked for help again. The one tool that could have blocked Voldemort was abandoned. And so the trap was set. When the vision of Sirius in the Department of Mysteries appeared, Harry had no defenses. He believed it without question. Voldemort had found a way to twist his mind and lure him into battle. If Harry had swallowed his pride and spoken honestly to Snape, or even to Dumbledore, the deception might have failed. Instead, the broken bond and Harry's silence left him exposed. The price was Sirius's life. Number 12, the Horcrux Mystery. The dream of the endless corridor haunted Harry through his 5th year. He could see the gleaming floor stretching forward, the doors silent on either side, and the heavy handle waiting at the very end. Each time the vision returned, the pull grew stronger. He was running down a long corridor, desperate to reach the door at the end of it. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Instead of bringing this to Dumbledore, Harry carried the secret alone, convinced it was just another trick of his scar. The visions became sharper, almost alive. He could feel the cool metal under his palm, hear the echo of his own footsteps. Ron and Hermione noticed his distracted stares, but Harry waved their questions away. He feared the truth would make him look weak or dangerous. Silence became his shield, even though it left him vulnerable. That shield, however, was exactly what Voldemort wanted. One night, the dream shifted into horror. Harry wasn't just walking toward the door. He was inside, seeing through the eyes of Nagini. Arthur Weasley was the target. He was watching from a position close to the floor. He saw Mr. Weasley slammed against the wall. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 21. Harry woke in terror, screaming, finally forced to tell Dumbledore. The Order managed to save Arthur, but the damage was done. Voldemort had found a path into Harry's mind. The corridor was no dream. It was bait, a carefully crafted illusion meant to lure Harry into the Department of Mysteries. And it succeeded. When he finally acted on what he saw, he dragged his friends into the trap and faced Death Eaters alone. Sirius Black fell that night, and the prophecy was exposed. If Harry had spoken sooner, if he had trusted Dumbledore or the Order with his visions from the beginning, Voldemort's plan might never have worked. His silence turned a dream into a weapon. Number 13. The Dream of the Ministry Corridor. Night after night, Harry dreamed of the same place, a long, dim corridor stretching endlessly forward, lined with doors that whispered of secrets. At the very end, one door shone brighter than the rest. He was walking along a narrow corridor. He wanted to reach that door at the end, the book describes. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 26. The dream pulled at him like a magnet, and each time he woke with the unsettling certainty that it mattered. Instead of confiding in Dumbledore, Harry tried to make sense of it alone, carrying the weight in silence. The corridor was not just a dream. It was the Ministry of Magic, and the door opened into the Department of Mysteries. Voldemort had planted the vision deliberately, knowing Harry's mind could be touched. The more vivid the dream became, the more Harry was drawn toward it. Yet he hesitated to tell anyone. He feared Dumbledore's distance. He feared sounding weak. And so he kept it inside, never realizing that his silence was feeding into Voldemort's trap. The danger finally revealed itself when Harry dreamed of Sirius being tortured in that very room. He's got Sirius, he's got him in the Department of Mysteries. He's trying to use him to get me there, Harry cried to his friends. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 32. Panic drowned out reason. If he had shared his earlier dreams with the Order, they might have checked the truth. Instead, Harry rushed to act, convinced Sirius's life depended on him alone. What followed was catastrophe. The vision was a lie, a cruel trick to lure Harry into danger. The corridor led him straight into the heart of Voldemort's plan, and the cost was Sirius Black's life. Had Harry spoken earlier, had he trusted Dumbledore, or even McGonagall, the trap might have been avoided. The dream was more than a warning. It was proof of how dangerous silence could be when the Dark Lord himself was whispering inside your head. Number 14, The Half-Blood Prince's Book. The old potions book that Harry stumbled upon in his 6th year looked ordinary at first glance. Yet inside, scribbled between the margins, were instructions that turned him from an average student into Slughorn's star pupil. With every improved potion, Harry's confidence grew. He followed notes like, crush the Sophophorus bean with the flat side of the silver dagger, and watched as classmates stared in disbelief at his sudden talent. The book whispered a promise of mastery, and Harry listened. But the hidden author was no ordinary student. The handwriting belonged to the so-called half-blood prince, a boy who had once walked the same halls. Between recipes and shortcuts, darker spells were scattered like traps. Harry's curiosity was stronger than his caution. He traced one incantation with his finger, Sectum Sempra, for enemies. The words lingered in his mind, daring him to try. At that moment, he should have sought Professor Dumbledore or at least confided in Hermione. Instead, he kept the secret close, convinced the book was his private key to greatness. The danger became real in the bathroom duel with Draco Malfoy. Anger pushed Harry to speak the forbidden word, Sectum Sempra. A slash cut the air, and Malfoy fell, bleeding heavily across the floor, gasping for life. The spell did exactly what it promised. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 24. Harry's horror came too late. He had unleashed magic far beyond his control, and only Snape's intervention saved Draco from death. That single moment exposed the peril of secrecy. Harry had carried a weapon hidden in plain sight, convinced he could handle it alone. If he had handed the book to Professor McGonagall, she would have recognized the danger immediately. If he had trusted Dumbledore, tragedy might have been avoided. Instead, his silence turned a school rivalry into near murder. The Half-Blood Prince's book was not just a guide. It was a reminder that power without guidance can wound more than it heals. Number 15, Arthur Weasley's Bite. All the unsettling moments in Harry Potter's 5th year, the attack on Arthur Weasley stands out not only for its danger, but also for the strange way in which Harry handled the aftermath. The vision came to him in the middle of the night when he was asleep in the room he shared with Ron at number 12, Grimold Place. Suddenly he was no longer himself but a predator, gliding across the floor of the Department of Mysteries, his body low and powerful, his senses alive with hunger and rage. He was the snake, Nagini, and through those slitted eyes he watched Arthur Weasley patrolling the corridor. The moment of attack was brutal and swift, fangs sinking into flesh, blood flowing. Harry awoke, screaming, his scar burning with the force of Voldemort's presence. It was one of the most frightening dreams he had ever endured, not just because of the violence, but because he felt it had been real. When he told Dumbledore about the vision, immediate action followed. The Order confirmed that Arthur Weasley had indeed been attacked in the Ministry, and he was rushed to St. Mungo's Hospital with his life hanging in the balance. Harry's warning had saved him. Yet beneath this success lay a disturbing detail. Harry had not merely seen the attack, he had experienced it through the snake's own perspective. He could feel the satisfaction of the strike, the sharp taste of blood, and the cruel desire to press harder. In that moment he was not just an observer but a participant, and this was something Harry instinctively hid from his closest friends. He told Ron and Hermione that he had dreamed of the attack, but he left out the part that mattered most, the fact that he had been inside Nagini. The decision to remain silent created a crack in his friendships, though his friends did not realize it yet. Hermione, in particular, might have given Harry the clarity he so desperately needed. She had long been the one to recognize hidden patterns, to connect danger with meaning. If Harry had confessed that he was seeing the attack through the serpent's eyes, she would have understood at once that something deeply unnatural was at play. Ron, too, though shaken, would have stood by him, but with their encouragement Harry might have approached Dumbledore differently. Instead, Harry let the fear fester inside him. "It was me," he thought, the words echoing in his mind. He feared that part of Voldemort had lodged itself inside him, that he was becoming a weapon without even realizing it. The books emphasize this inner struggle. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry reflects with dread. He was the snake, he was sure of it. It was as though he had been inside Nagini, looking out through her eyes. That realization gnawed at him, but he shared it with no one. The secrecy poisoned his thoughts, leaving him isolated even among those who loved him most. It was one of the many times when silence became his enemy, when his reluctance to trust others only deepened his vulnerability. Why did Harry hold back? Part of it was shame. The idea that he could take pleasure in hurting someone, that he could feel the snake's savage instincts as his own, terrified him. He could not bring himself to say aloud that he had enjoyed the sensation of the strike, even if it was not truly his own. To voice it would be to admit that Voldemort's soul was bleeding into his own. He convinced himself that silence was a form of protection for Ron and Hermione, sparing them the horror of the truth. Yet in reality, his secrecy robbed him of their guidance at the very moment he most needed it. Another part of Harry's silence came from the distance Dumbledore himself created that year. Unlike in previous adventures, where the headmaster had always been approachable, Dumbledore now avoided Harry. He looked past him, spoke little, and kept him at arm's length. Harry interpreted this as rejection, even punishment. Without the steady hand of the one adult he trusted most, Harry turned inward. He believed that no one could understand what he was experiencing, and so he locked the truth inside his own heart. This isolation only strengthened Voldemort's hold over his thoughts. Had he chosen differently, the story might have changed. Imagine if Harry had gathered Ron and Hermione in the dark kitchen of Grimmauld Place and told them plainly, "I was not watching the attack, I was the snake." Hermione would have gasped, but then gone quiet, thinking rapidly, recognizing the connection to Horcruxes long before Harry himself learned the term. Ron, horrified, would still have defended his friend against any suspicion of guilt. Together they might have urged Harry to demand answers from Dumbledore, to confront the headmaster about the nature of this strange bond. Instead, Harry endured sleepless nights, wondering whether he was Voldemort's puppet, wondering if he was capable of turning against his friends without warning. The cost of his silence was heavy. After the attack, Harry's mood darkened further. He avoided eye contact, flinched when touched, and snapped in anger more easily than ever before. The memory of being Nagini lingered. I wasn't watching from outside. I was the snake, he admitted only to himself. His friends noticed his distance, but did not know its cause. They attributed it to the stress of Umbridge, to the strain of the prophecy he had overheard. The real truth lay hidden in Harry's heart, where fear grew unchecked. Number 16, Kreacher's Lies. Harry Potter's journey through his 5th year at Hogwarts was marked by isolation, frustration, and an ever-increasing sense of being misunderstood. When the moment came that demanded clarity and trust, Harry was too entangled in his anger and fear to act with patience. The clearest example of this is the night when Kreacher, the house elf bound to the Black family, lied to him about Sirius's whereabouts. Instead of pausing, asking questions, or seeking help from those wiser than him, Harry made a fatal decision that sent him and his friends into the Department of Mysteries. The consequences of that night rippled through the entire story and cost Sirius his life. The tragedy stemmed not from Voldemort's trap alone, but from Harry's refusal to reach out for guidance when it mattered most. Harry had spent most of his year mistrusting the adults around him. Dumbledore seemed distant, withholding eye contact and refusing explanations. His professors either doubted him or dismissed his visions of Voldemort. Even among his friends there were moments of hesitation and tension. This alienation fed his reliance on what he thought were his instincts. When Kreacher told him that Sirius was not at home, Harry accepted it as confirmation of the vision he had seen in the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort torturing Sirius in the Hall of Prophecies. Rowling writes, Kreacher's thin lips curled into a smile, his bloodshot eyes gleamed with malice as he... Master is not here. Master has gone out. It was not subtle, and yet Harry believed him. He had been warned countless times not to trust everything he saw in his visions, but in this desperate moment he closed himself off to every alternative. There was a moment of choice, and Harry had more than one avenue for help. Severus Snape was in the same building and had the means to contact the Order of the Phoenix immediately. Harry even had a direct way of testing Kreacher's words, for he knew Dumbledore's Phoenix Forks could travel instantly and deliver messages. But anger clouded his judgment. He despised Snape, convinced that his hatred for Sirius would prevent him from taking any danger seriously. He dismissed the idea of contacting Dumbledore because he was still hurt by the headmaster's coldness. Harry let these resentments make the decision for him. Instead of seeking counsel, he placed blind faith in the very Kreacher he had never trusted, simply because Kreacher's lie fit the narrative of fear already forming in his mind. The irony of the situation is almost unbearable. For months, Harry had treated Kreacher with contempt, recognizing the elf's spiteful nature. Sirius had even warned him that Kreacher was not to be trusted, not to be given information. And yet at the pivotal moment, Harry turned to Kreacher, asked him about Sirius, and accepted the lie with almost no hesitation. The elf had found the perfect opportunity to betray his master, as Rowling notes in the book. Kreacher regarded Harry with his gleaming, malice-filled eyes, and for once, Harry did not think to question the answer. This lapse in judgment was not born of trust, but of panic. Harry wanted so desperately for the vision to be true, to justify his fears, that he ignored every warning sign. This was not the first time Harry had visions that blurred truth and deception. Earlier in the year, Dumbledore and others had urged him to practice occlumency with Snape. He resisted, despised the lessons, and never mastered the skill. As a result, his connection with Voldemort remained unguarded, allowing the Dark Lord to plant false images in his mind. When the vision of Sirius being tortured came, it was not the first vision Harry had seen. But instead of seeking verification, he rushed headlong into action. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, had pleaded with him to slow down. "Harry, it could be a trap," she insisted, but Harry dismissed her worries. In the end, it was not just Voldemort's cunning, but Harry's unwillingness to stop and ask for help that sealed Sirius's fate. Snape's role in this tragedy is particularly painful to consider. Though Harry hated him, Snape was in fact the one adult who understood both the risk of Voldemort's manipulation and the urgency of the situation. Had Harry revealed the full details of his vision, that Sirius was supposedly in the Department of Mysteries, Snape might have acted more swiftly. Instead, Harry spoke only in riddles, delivering a vague warning during his occlumency lesson. "He's got Padfoot at the place where it's hidden." The cryptic phrase was almost meaningless without context, and Snape, accustomed to Harry's dramatics, chose not to push harder. If Harry had swallowed his pride and clearly explained what he had seen, the Order would have been mobilized at once. Sirius might never have left Grimmauld Place at all. The tragedy of Kreacher's lie lies not just in the deception, but in how preventable it was. The Order of the Phoenix had members stationed throughout London, capable of moving quickly. Fawkes himself had already demonstrated his ability to transport people across great distances, and Harry had already seen how readily the adults in the Order responded to danger when informed. But in this moment, he decided that only he and his closest friends could act. It was the ultimate expression of the saving people thing Hermione accused him of. Instead of recognizing his limitations, Harry assumed the burden of action alone, and in doing so played directly into Voldemort's hands. Number 17, the Slytherin locket. The discovery of Salazar Slytherin's locket deep inside the Ministry of Magic marked one of the most perilous turns in Harry Potter's quest. After months of speculation, blind searching, and following only fragmentary hints from Dumbledore's cryptic lessons, Harry, Hermione, and Ron finally seized a true Horcrux in their hands. It was a moment that should have sparked relief, for here was undeniable progress in the war against Voldemort. Instead, the locket became a slow poison to their unity, an object that whispered discontent and magnified insecurities. And in this entire ordeal, one haunting question remains. Why did Harry never reach out to the Order of the Phoenix, or even individuals like Minerva McGonagall, Kingsley Shacklebolt, or Remus Lupin? The silence cost them dearly, both emotionally and physically, and its effects ripple through the narrative of Deathly Hallows. When the trio escaped the Ministry after stealing the locket from Dolores Umbridge, they carried with them not only a cursed object, but also a secret that isolated them further from allies. Hermione knew at once that the locket could not simply be destroyed with conventional magic. She recalled Dumbledore's attempt to destroy the gaunt ring and realized that only something imbued with the extraordinary, like Godric Gryffindor's sword, could pierce a Horcrux. And yet, instead of turning to their elders for advice, the three teenagers shut themselves away in forests, surviving on mushrooms, nettle tea, and the painful weight of mistrust. The Order might not have had an immediate answer, but surely Lupin, with his measured intellect, or even Bill Weasley, who had Gringotts' experience, could have provided insight. Harry's decision to remain silent was both an act of loyalty to Dumbledore's secrecy and a tragic error. The locket's influence became apparent almost immediately. Wearing the locket turned you into the worst version of yourself, Rowling writes, capturing how the Horcrux preyed upon each bearer's fears. Ron became suspicious and resentful, convinced that Harry and Hermione had grown closer behind his back. Harry himself was tormented by visions of Ginny, vulnerable at Hogwarts, and by doubts about his leadership. Hermione was reduced to a thin, anxious figure, forced to carry the burden of keeping them both together. This was not just a trial of endurance, but a calculated sabotage of their bond, orchestrated by Voldemort's magic. An adult ally might have recognized the signs and forced them to seek an alternative, but the three, stubborn and alone, spiraled deeper into isolation. The secrecy was not without context. Harry was haunted by Dumbledore's last instructions that he alone must finish the task of finding and destroying the Horcruxes. "You are the true master of death," Dumbledore's shade would later tell him, but in the woods all Harry heard was a crushing responsibility. He convinced himself that to share the burden would be to weaken the mission, to risk betrayal, or to fail Dumbledore's trust. Yet this interpretation was narrow. Dumbledore had never instructed Harry to push away every helping hand. Dumbledore himself relied on allies, Snape for delicate missions, McGonagall for protection of the school, and even Harry for the most dangerous errands. Harry, blinded by his grief and youthful pride, believed he had to carry everything on his shoulders, and this belief nearly destroyed him. Ron's departure remains one of the most painful results of the locket's corruption. "You think I don't know how this feels?" Ron shouted before he disapparated into the night, leaving Harry and Hermione stunned. His anger was not merely jealousy, it was the Horcrux amplifying every insecurity he carried as the sixth son, forever in the shadow of his brothers and best friend. If Lupin had been with them, or even a trusted Order member, Someone could have recognized the magical manipulation and intervened, but in their isolation, Ron's doubts metastasized until he abandoned the mission altogether. Harry, though devastated, still refused to seek outside counsel. His silence perpetuated the cycle of suffering. Hermione's brilliance kept them alive, but even she faltered under the weight of secrecy. She researched endlessly, poring through the tales of Beedle the Bard and through half-burned scraps of parchment, trying to make sense of what Dumbledore might have intended. Still, she reached dead ends. Her desperation was evident when she admitted, "We don't even know how to destroy it." The Order, scattered though it was, had witches and wizards with centuries of collective knowledge. Perhaps even the goblins, bitter as they were, could have shed light on magical metals and ancient enchantments. By walling themselves off, the trio ensured that every problem was solved in a vacuum, and the price was weeks of wasted time and a friendship stretched to breaking. The medallion itself was no ordinary Horcrux. It bore the serpent crest of Salazar Slytherin, a relic steeped in prejudice and dark magic. Inside, the fragment of Voldemort's soul seethed with cruelty, whispering lies and drawing out insecurities. Harry heard it mock his leadership. Ron saw visions of Hermione preferring Harry, and Hermione suffered the endless taunts of inadequacy. It was, in essence, a psychological weapon as much as a magical one. An older witch or wizard might have recognized this as a form of possession or cursed influence. Mad-Eye Moody, had he lived, would have insisted on constant vigilance against such artifacts. But in the trio's self-imposed exile, no one offered them perspective. They bore the weight alone, as children against a manipulative fragment of the Dark Lord. When Ron finally returned, guided by the Deluminator's mysterious light, it was not because of Harry's leadership, but because of Dumbledore's foresight. The Deluminator whispered Hermione's voice to Ron, pulling him back to his friends. This reunion should never have been left to chance. It highlights how fragile the trio's unity had become, and how close they were to permanent fracture. Harry's reluctance to reach out meant that reconciliation and progress came only through luck and a magical artifact, rather than deliberate support from allies. The locket had nearly won, and it was only Ron's bravery and redemption that prevented disaster. Number 18. The Dragon Task. Of all the reckless moments in Harry Potter's journey through the Triwizard Tournament, none feels quite as telling as the night he learned he was to face a dragon. It was not the dragon itself that defined the moment, terrifying as it was, but rather Harry's instinctive reaction to the knowledge. He did not confide in Dumbledore, nor seek protection from McGonagall, nor even attempt to use his sudden information to protest the danger of the task. Instead, Harry chose silence. This decision, small in the moment, became another brick in the wall of his isolation. It showed how early he had been conditioned to fight his battles alone, even when the stakes were life or death. The secrecy surrounding the task was not his fault, but his unwillingness to share what he knew with the adults who could have changed something revealed a pattern that would haunt him again and again. The discovery itself was accidental. Hagrid, loyal as ever, wanted Harry to be prepared and invited him under the cloak of darkness to visit the dragons hidden in the Forbidden Forest. Harry went, concealed by his invisibility cloak, and to his horror saw what awaited him. In the words of the book, Harry's heart dropped like a stone into his stomach. He was looking straight into the eyes of a Hungarian horntail. He should never have been placed in that position at all, for the very idea of students facing dragons was grotesque. Yet what mattered most was that Harry had been given a glimpse behind the curtain of the tournament, and in that instant he had a choice: to go to Dumbledore with the truth or to keep it buried. Why did Harry keep silent? Part of the answer lies in his complicated relationship with authority. Harry had spent his childhood with the Dursleys, learning not to trust adults with his problems because those problems were always dismissed or punished. At Hogwarts, He admired Dumbledore deeply, but also believed him to be distant and unreachable. In Goblet of Fire, the headmaster was more distracted than ever, tied up in the politics of the tournament and the shadow of Voldemort's return. Harry convinced himself that Dumbledore already knew. He must know, Harry thought. He must have arranged it. That assumption silenced him before he even considered speaking. If Dumbledore approved of the dragons, then what good would come of protesting? Better, Harry thought, to focus on survival. This silence also reveals Harry's growing acceptance of danger as a permanent feature of his life. Unlike Cedric Diggory, who had parents watching anxiously in the stands, or Victor Crumb, who carried the expectations of his nation, Harry had long since learned to treat mortal peril as routine. In Chamber of Secrets, he had gone alone into the basilisk's lair. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he had faced Dementors without hope of rescue. By the time he confronted the reality of the dragon, he no longer asked whether it was fair or safe. He asked only, "How will I get through this alive?" It was the question of someone who had accepted isolation so completely that the idea of appealing for help seemed alien. The irony of the situation was sharp. The Triwizard Tournament was ostensibly a contest of skill, intelligence, and magical ability. Yet here, Harry found himself reduced to secrecy and guesswork. The other champions were warned indirectly as well, but each of them leaned on someone for aid. Fleur Delacour was advised by Madame Maxime, Victor Crumb by Igor Karkaroff, and Cedric Diggory by Harry himself, who passed on the tip because it seemed only fair. Harry alone received no official word. "It's dragons," he told Cedric. "That's the first task." Yet even as he shared with his rival, he never once considered going to the headmaster of his own school. That omission speaks louder than his generosity. There was also pride involved, though Harry rarely admitted it even to himself. To tell Dumbledore would have been to confess his fear. To speak to McGonagall would have been to reveal that he was in over his head. Harry had spent so long being doubted by Snape, by Malfoy, even by sections of the student body who believed he had cheated his way into the tournament, that he refused to give anyone the satisfaction of hearing him plead. Silence became a shield, protecting him from the suspicion that he was weak. When he later confided in Sirius, it was already too late to alter the course of events. "You're up against dragons," Sirius warned grimly. "That's a different matter entirely." But even then, Harry framed it as a tactical problem, not an injustice to be confronted. One of the most striking details of this episode is that Harry's warning came through dubious channels. Hagrid, loyal but indiscreet, was the one who took him to see the dragons. Igor Karkaroff, the former Death Eater, was also present, ensuring that his own champion, Victor Crumb, was equally informed. The whole affair stank of corruption, of rules bent and secrecy traded. Yet Harry did not recoil from this arrangement. He accepted it because it was all he had. That acceptance reveals how little he trusted the official guardians of the tournament. Instead of going to the judges or the ministry officials who claimed to oversee the contest, he relied on a half-giant groundskeeper and an untrustworthy rival headmaster. The imbalance of power could not have been clearer. If we examine this moment in light of the larger narrative, it foreshadows Harry's later struggles with authority in Order of the Phoenix. There, too, he felt abandoned by adults who should have been guiding him. There, too, he took matters into his own hands, founding Dumbledore's army because the official curriculum failed to protect students. The dragon task was the seed of that independence. Having once chosen silence rather than appeal to power, Harry continued to do so in every subsequent crisis. He became a leader not because he craved it, but because he believed no one else would step in. The silence in the face of the dragon was an early rehearsal of that lonely destiny. Another reason for Harry's decision lies in his experience with the magical community's double standards. When his name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, he was met not with support, but with suspicion. Students jeered that he had cheated. Even Ron, his best friend, turned against him. To then go to Dumbledore and say, "I shouldn't face this dragon, it's too dangerous," might have sounded to others like cowardice or proof of guilt. Harry knew the weight of public perception. He was already branded an impostor by many. Silence was safer than risking further ridicule. Better to face the dragon than to appear weak. Yet that silence nearly cost him everything. The task itself was brutal. The Horntail's talons gouged the earth, its flames scorched the air, and the crowd gasped as Harry darted for cover. The only reason he survived was his skill with the summoning charm, Accio, which allowed him to call his broom and outfly the beast. But even that success was born of desperation, taught to him at the last moment by Hermione. If Harry had gone to Dumbledore earlier, perhaps the task would have been mitigated or the injustice of it exposed. Instead, he carried the burden alone, and the world watched as a 14-year-old boy fought a dragon for their entertainment. Looking at this choice through the lens of character development, it reinforces the tragic dimension of Harry's story. He was loved by many, admired by friends and professors, but he rarely felt supported when it mattered. That sense of abandonment drove him to silence again and again. The dragon task is remembered as one of his most thrilling victories, but behind the triumph lies a boy who chose not to ask for help, even when his life depended on it. The silence was not heroic, it was survival, shaped by years of neglect and mistrust. There is also a symbolic layer in this decision. Dragons in mythology often represent chaos, destruction, and insurmountable obstacles. To face one alone is the archetype of the solitary hero's journey. By refusing to ask for help, Harry stepped fully into that archetype, casting himself as the lone warrior against impossible odds. Whether he realized it or not, he was already living the story that others would tell about him. The boy who lived had to continue to live, not by collaboration, but by solitary defiance. Asking for help would have broken that myth. Silence preserved it. At the same time, the silence casts a shadow over the adults around him. What does it say about Dumbledore that Harry did not feel able to confide? What does it say about the ministry officials who staged a tournament where secrecy and mortal danger were treated as acceptable? The dragon task exposes not only Harry's isolation, but also the failure of the systems meant to protect him. A child was placed in front of a monster, and the only choice he saw was to endure. The silence is damning not only of Harry's mistrust, but of the world that taught him mistrust was necessary. The lesson of this episode becomes clearer in retrospect. Harry's refusal to ask for help was not a show of strength, but a scar left by years of neglect. It foreshadowed his later choices, from sneaking into the Department of Mysteries to walking into the Forbidden Forest to meet Voldemort. Each time, he believed he had to go alone. The dragon was the first great test of that philosophy, and his silence ensured that the test would proceed. He won the day, but at the cost of reinforcing the belief that solitude was his only path. Perhaps the most haunting element of this silence is how invisible it seems. Readers often focus on the excitement of the dragon chase, the roar of the crowd, the dazzling flight of the firebolt. Yet beneath the spectacle lies a boy's quiet decision not to ask for help. That decision, simple and unspoken, mattered more than the fire or the talons. It was the decision that set the pattern for everything that followed. Harry Potter, given the chance to cry out against injustice, chose instead to remain silent, and that silence shaped the course of his fate. Number 19. The Dementor attack on Privet Drive. On Privet Drive, that summer before his 5th year at Hogwarts, Harry Potter endured what might have been one of the most disorienting moments of his young life. The attack of the Dementors in Little Whinging was not only terrifying, but also profoundly revealing about his instincts, his stubborn independence, and his inability to ask for help, even when danger pressed close. The scene unfolded on a quiet August evening when Harry and his cousin Dudley Dursley were walking home after an argument, only to find themselves enveloped by the sudden, unnatural chill that always accompanied Dementors. The cold was biting deeper than any winter night Harry could remember, the book recalls, and that creeping horror announced that the monsters of Azkaban had invaded the Muggle suburb. Yet afterward, instead of immediately reaching out to Dumbledore, to Sirius Black, or to the Order of the Phoenix, Harry remained silent, waiting for events to catch up to him. This silence, whether born of pride, fear, or distrust, became a turning point that shaped the way the Ministry of Magic treated him in the weeks that followed. The sheer strangeness of the situation cannot be overstated. Dementors were supposed to be under the control of the Ministry, stationed as guards at Azkaban. Their presence in Little Whinging was not only improbable, but outright alarming, hinting at a deliberate attempt to harm Harry under the very nose of the Muggle world. And yet Harry's reaction, though brave in the moment, betrayed a flaw in his judgment. He fought them back with the only weapon he had, his Patronus charm, summoning a shining stag that scattered the Dementors before they could administer the soul-sucking kiss. "Expecto Patronum!" he bellowed, and the white stag leapt forth, chasing the darkness away. The power of the moment was remarkable, but so too was the isolation of it. When it was over, Harry was left panting in the alley, Dudley collapsed beside him, and the entire event cloaked in secrecy. At that moment, Harry chose silence over outreach, as though he had to carry this weight alone. One cannot ignore how dangerous this silence was. If Harry had fallen victim to the Dementor's kiss, or if Dudley had, the consequences would have been irreversible. The attack itself was evidence that Voldemort's forces were gaining power and influence even in supposedly safe areas. This was precisely the kind of information Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix needed as quickly as possible. But instead of seeking them out, Harry retreated, waiting for the Ministry to summon him in accusation, rather than standing first to defend his actions. His silence gave others control of the narrative. It was Mrs. Figg, the squib neighbour secretly tasked with watching him, who broke the isolation, urging him back to Privet Drive and advising him to stay quiet. But Harry's decision not to reach out directly to those who could shield him, Sirius, Lupin, or Dumbledore himself, would cost him dearly. The Ministry of Magic seized upon his silence as an opportunity. Within days he received a letter from Mafalda Hopkirk of the improper use of magic office, informing him that he was expelled from Hogwarts for conjuring a Patronus in front of a Muggle. The irony was devastating. Harry had used magic not to show off, not to break the rules frivolously, but to defend his and his cousin's very souls from destruction. The letter, with its harsh and unyielding words, stripped away any sense of justice. "Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that at 23 minutes past 9 this evening you performed the Patronus charm in a fictitious Muggle-inhabited area. As you are already aware, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school, and further to the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, you are hereby expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The cold bureaucracy of the letter sealed his fate, or so it seemed at the time. But had Harry acted first, reaching out to allies, perhaps the Ministry would not have been the first to cast judgment. It is here that the question becomes sharper. Why did Harry not send an owl to Dumbledore immediately? The boy had access to Hedwig, he had access to Sirius, and he knew that extraordinary events demanded extraordinary responses. Yet Harry hesitated, lost in a haze of fear and frustration. Part of this reluctance came from his strained communication with Dumbledore during that summer. Harry felt cut off, excluded from the secrets the Order was keeping at Grimmauld Place. Letters from Ron and Hermione were scarce and heavily censored. The isolation bred a simmering anger that left Harry unwilling to extend his hand for help. He felt cut off from the world, from everything that mattered, the text notes of those weeks. That sense of abandonment hardened him, so when danger struck, his first impulse was not to seek comfort but to assume no one would listen anyway. Another reason may lie in his own stubborn sense of responsibility. Harry had always borne the weight of danger as though it was his cross alone. From his first year, when he pursued the Philosopher's Stone without consulting teachers, to his reckless decision in the Triwizard Tournament to face challenges with minimal help, Harry's pattern was set. He viewed asking for aid as weakness, a kind of surrender to vulnerability. After fighting off the Dementors, he must have thought that the immediate threat was handled, that he could simply endure whatever fallout came. What he failed to realize was that Voldemort's supporters thrived on manipulation of perception as much as direct violence. His silence gave the Ministry, under Cornelius Fudge's leadership, room to paint him as reckless, unstable, even dangerous. This silence also fueled the spectacle of his trial at the Ministry. Instead of a minor disciplinary matter, Harry found himself dragged into a full hearing before the Wizengamot. "You are here to answer charges relating to the use of magic by a minor," Fudge intoned, as though Harry were a hardened criminal. The chamber, filled with robed witches and wizards, became a theatre of accusation. Dumbledore appeared, of course, to defend him, but the trial was already coloured by suspicion. Dolores Umbridge, seated nearby, made her presence known with the faint coughs and smug smiles that would later plague Harry at Hogwarts. If Harry had sought help immediately, sending an owl with his testimony and perhaps even securing a statement from Arabella Figg, the tone of the trial might have been different, but instead he allowed others to frame the story first. The irony lies in the fact that Harry's very survival of the Dementor attack was proof of extraordinary skill. Casting a corporeal Patronus at 15 was an achievement even many adult wizards could not boast. Lupin had once explained to him that it was advanced magic, requiring focus and mastery beyond his years, but rather than being celebrated, this strength was twisted against him. Fudge and his supporters used it to suggest that Harry had grown too powerful, too independent, and thus untrustworthy. It was a masterstroke of political spin. Had Harry reached out to allies before the Ministries noticed, that spin could have been challenged with evidence and testimony to the contrary. There is also the matter of Dudley Dursley. As much as Harry resented his cousin, Dudley's near encounter with the Dementor's kiss was evidence that Harry's actions were entirely justified. Dudley collapsed, helpless, nearly a victim of forces he could not comprehend. In the aftermath, he became shaken, subdued, a far cry from his usual bullying self. Petunia and Vernon, however, were outraged at the disturbance and blamed Harry as always. In this hostile household, Harry may have felt too suffocated to compose himself enough to seek help properly. The Dursleys' refusal to understand anything magical compounded his feeling of entrapment, yet. Again, this does not erase the fact that his owl could have flown to Dumbledore, bypassing the walls of Privet Drive. His silence was not imposed, it was chosen. It is important to note that Dumbledore himself was aware of the event, though his choice of strategy was unusual. He deliberately kept his distance from Harry in the following weeks, hoping to protect him from Voldemort's growing ability to invade his mind. This left Harry even more isolated, a decision that backfired emotionally. If Harry had taken the initiative, pushing past his hurt feelings and writing directly to the headmaster, perhaps the silence between them would have cracked sooner. Instead, their relationship remained strained, each waiting for the other to bridge the gap. The attack on Privet Drive also symbolized Voldemort's new strategy, bringing the war into the open to the places that had once been safe. The Dementor's presence was no accident. It was orchestrated by Dolores Umbridge herself, already working to discredit Harry and Dumbledore. By remaining silent, Harry unintentionally played into her hands. She wanted the boy labelled a liar, an attention-seeker, and a lawbreaker. Every moment Harry stayed quiet allowed her narrative to gain ground. The trial, his humiliation at Hogwarts, and the smear campaign in the Daily Prophet all flowed from this initial silence. Even Harry's friends could see the weight of this isolation. When he finally reached Grimmauld Place, he burst out in anger at Ron and Hermione, shouting that they had abandoned him, left him in the dark while danger brewed. His rage was not unfounded, but it was also tangled with his own refusal to act. He blamed others for silence while also embracing his own. This contradiction revealed the heart of his struggle. He wanted desperately to be part of the fight against Voldemort, but he was also too proud, too wounded, to ask for help in the moments it mattered most. The lessons of this moment echoed through the year. At Hogwarts, under Umbridge's oppressive rule, Harry eventually learned the importance of collective action. The creation of Dumbledore's army was, in many ways, his response to that lonely fight on Privet Drive. Instead of standing alone, he began to teach others, to share knowledge, to build solidarity. It was a reversal of the silence that had nearly destroyed him. The stag Patronus, once a symbol of his solitary strength, became a shared lesson among his peers, yet the cost of the earlier mistake lingered. The Ministry never stopped viewing him as a threat, and Umbridge never stopped undermining him. Ultimately, the Dementor attack stands as a case study of what happens when fear and pride prevent someone from reaching for help. Harry's courage in casting the Patronus was undeniable, but his refusal to speak afterward nearly cost him his place at Hogwarts and his credibility in the wizarding world. The irony is that the boy who lived was not defeated by Voldemort that summer, but nearly undone by his own silence. This moment, more than many others, revealed that survival in war is not only about bravery in the alleyway, but also about the wisdom to ask for allies when shadows close in. Number 20. The Cursed Necklace in Hogsmeade. Under the snow-dusted roofs of Hogsmeade, a single, careless moment turned into catastrophe. Katie Bell, cheerful and unsuspecting, reached for a wrapped package, only to collapse, screaming in the air as the cursed necklace touched her skin. The black opals glistened with a sinister light, and Harry Potter, standing only a few feet away, felt an immediate chill in his bones. He knew what he had seen was no accident. The necklace had been hexed with a dark curse powerful enough to kill. In that instant, Harry's instincts screamed that something larger was at play, and his mind, already burdened by a growing obsession with Draco Malfoy, found yet another thread to pull. It should have been the moment to seek immediate help from Professor McGonagall or Dumbledore himself. Yet Harry did what he had done so often before. He folded into silence and turned the mystery into his own private battle. The moment with the necklace is one of those turning points that show Harry's stubborn independence. After Katie was rushed to the hospital wing, Harry's mind did not race toward trusted authority, but toward suspicion. "Malfoy knows something," he muttered, as though the answer was already written. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling describes Harry's immediate conviction. "It was Malfoy. I know it was Malfoy. He was there in Hogsmeade under the invisibility cloak." Harry could not prove it, but in his heart he was certain. The problem was that certainty alone could not solve a mystery, nor could it protect the school. His silence became a prison, one where he placed all responsibility on himself to uncover the truth while keeping his doubts hidden from those who might have acted faster and more effectively. The cursed necklace had a history that made it all the more dangerous. Harry had heard its name before, a sinister relic of the wizarding world, sold and passed along by shady hands in Knockturn Alley. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, it had been listed among Borgin and Burke's most deadly items, a necklace that had already claimed multiple lives. Harry, more than anyone, should have remembered how seriously the professors would have taken such an artifact. But he did not push forward his suspicions. Instead, his focus narrowed onto Malfoy's involvement, and his tunnel vision made him believe that professors would dismiss him yet again, just as they had so many times before when he sounded the alarm about danger within the castle walls. This refusal to seek help echoed patterns from Harry's earlier years. In the Chamber of Secrets, he had avoided sharing his suspicions about Tom Riddle's diary until events spiraled out of control. In the Goblet of Fire, he chose to endure Voldemort's return with little institutional support. and now, when faced with a girl writhing from the touch of an object designed to kill, Harry slipped back into the same mindset. He did not fully brief Dumbledore. He did not insist that Snape, a master of the dark arts, examine the clues. He did not confide in McGonagall, whose protective instincts would have mobilized half the castle. Instead, he confined his words to Ron and Hermione, loyal friends, but hardly experts in unraveling a dark curse tied to Voldemort's plot. Harry's reasoning might have seemed solid to him. Throughout the book, he felt Dumbledore was growing more distant, preoccupied with memories of Voldemort's past and with the hunt for Horcruxes. McGonagall, though trustworthy, seemed to Harry like someone who would urge him to stop obsessing. Snape was the last person Harry wanted to consult. And so, by isolating himself, Harry fell into a trap of his own making. His suspicions about Malfoy hardened into an obsession, not a case he could argue with evidence. He stalked Malfoy through corridors, spied on him in the Slytherin common room using the Marauder's map, and pressed friends into reluctant surveillance. Yet the necklace remained a mystery unsolved, its significance clouded by the fact that no adult was ever given the full weight of Harry's insight. The tragedy of Katie Bell's accident is not simply that she was cursed, but that her suffering could have been a warning signal, one that Harry muffled through his silence. Dumbledore, who had faced cursed objects many times, would have understood immediately that this was not a random attack but part of a coordinated plot to infiltrate Hogwarts with deadly magic. Snape, with his expertise, might have traced the magic back to its caster. Even Slughorn, with his vast knowledge of the dark arts, could have helped identify the origins of the hex. But instead, Harry clung to his private certainty. The result was predictable. When he did voice his suspicions, nobody believed him except Ron and Hermione, Rowling tells us. The professors dismissed his claims as paranoid fixations, and the necklace remained a shadow of fear rather than a solved crime. It is worth noting that Harry's instincts were not entirely wrong. Draco Malfoy was behind the smuggling of cursed objects into the school, including both the necklace and the poisoned mead intended for Dumbledore. But Harry's choice to bypass adult intervention made his theory less credible. By refusing to present evidence, he left himself sounding like a boy crying wolf. "You're obsessed, Harry," Hermione warned him, a statement that cut to the heart of the matter. His obsession blinded him, making him forget that the goal was not proving Malfoy's guilt, but protecting those around him from further harm. Katie's life had already been nearly taken, and yet Harry's energy bent toward the duel of pride between himself and Malfoy rather than the broader safety of the school. Rowling paints Harry's frustration vividly. He pounds his fists on tables, insists to Ron and Hermione that he is right, and fumes when professors dismiss him. Yet what he does not do is escalate the matter in a way that adults could not ignore. His silence left the professors blind, and the gap in communication gave Malfoy more time to work in the shadows, opening the vanishing cabinet and preparing the path for Death Eaters. What might have been stopped after Katie's attack became instead the seed of a greater disaster, the invasion of Hogwarts and the death of Dumbledore himself. The necklace serves as a symbol in this narrative. It is the embodiment of hidden danger, passed through innocent hands, invisible until it strikes. For Katie, it was nearly the end of her life. For Harry, it was another riddle he felt destined to solve alone. "Why is it always down to me to sort it out?" he thought more than once throughout his years at Hogwarts. That sense of destiny hardened into arrogance, making him believe that he alone could piece together the truth. But destiny was not the same as wisdom, and in this case his silence played into the hands of his enemy. It shows us how Harry's bravery, unmatched and fierce, was often paired with a refusal to trust those who might have saved lives sooner. The necklace incident also reflects Harry's mistrust of institutions. The Ministry of Magic had mocked him during the previous year, refusing to believe in Voldemort's return until too late. Cornelius Fudge called him delusional, the prophet printed lies about him, and even Hogwarts professors sometimes treated him as a boy chasing shadows. That history weighed heavily on Harry's choices. He had learned the hard way that adults did not always listen. But in this case, those assumptions betrayed him. Within the walls of Hogwarts, he had allies who would have acted, but his past scars made him hesitate. When Dumbledore later told Harry that Malfoy had indeed been acting on Voldemort's orders, it was not a revelation to Harry but a vindication. Yet it was vindication without triumph. For all his accuracy in suspicion, he had not prevented harm, nor had he used his knowledge to alter events. The cursed necklace became one more example of a pattern in which Harry saw danger early, but could not persuade others because he failed to channel his knowledge to those with the power to intervene. In storytelling terms, this is not a flaw in logic, but a flaw in character, the kind of stubborn independence that makes Harry heroic and tragic at the same time. The lingering question remains, what if Harry had spoken? What if he had placed the necklace into McGonagall's hands and laid out his suspicions in detail? What if he had pressed Dumbledore to act, even at the cost of sounding paranoid? The path of the story might have shifted. Malfoy's plans might have been uncovered sooner, the cabinet destroyed, the Death Eaters kept outside the castle walls. But because Harry chose silence, because he bore his suspicions like a private burden, events moved forward toward the inevitable fall of the Astronomy Tower. The cursed necklace in Hogsmeade was not merely an attack. It was a warning, a sign that Voldemort's war had breached the walls of Hogwarts in more ways than one. Harry recognized that truth but failed to use it. Instead, his silence let the warning fade into the background until it was too late. Katie survived, but the school did not remain untouched. Dumbledore fell, the Death Eaters roamed the castle, and the war truly began. The necklace, glittering darkly in memory, stands as the moment Harry could have spoken, could have sought help, but chose instead to carry the weight alone. Number 21, Malfoy's secret mission. Under the flickering light of Hogwarts torches, one of the most puzzling mysteries Harry ever faced was not a dark spell or a cursed object, but the shadowy behavior of Draco Malfoy. From the very first weeks of sixth year, Harry was convinced that Malfoy had joined Voldemort. He had watched him on the train, pale and secretive, surrounded by other Slytherins, speaking with a confidence that did not belong to a boy, but to someone given a dreadful mission. Maybe he was a Death Eater now, Harry thought, echoing the suspicion that gnawed at him through the pages of Half-Blood Prince. And yet, though he held that conviction so tightly, he chose not to seek help from Dumbledore or McGonagall, the very figures who could have given him answers. Instead, he carried the burden himself, and in doing so, he walked straight into one of the greatest failures of his Hogwarts years. The hints were everywhere. Malfoy slipped away from the great hall, his eyes darting to shadows where no one else looked. He avoided his usual taunts and snide remarks, trading them for a silence that was far more alarming than his insults. Harry saw him disappearing into the room of requirement, which manifested to Malfoy as a hidden chamber where the vanishing cabinet waited. The cabinet, dusty and broken since the days when Peeves dropped its twin in Hogwarts, had become Draco's obsession. Harry watched him vanish inside the wall and felt his suspicions harden into near certainty. He told Ron and Hermione, but when their skepticism pushed back, Harry clung even tighter to his private investigation. He never walked to McGonagall's office, never knocked on Dumbledore's door with the words, "I think Malfoy is up to something dark." That silence would cost him dearly. One moment in particular stood out like a flare. In the library, Hermione reminded Harry of how he had once suspected Snape in their first year, and how often he had been wrong about people. "You're seeing Death Eaters behind every bookshelf," she said, her voice steeped in caution. But Harry's gut would not let go. He remembered the sight of Malfoy's arm being grabbed by his mother on platform 9 3/4, how Narcissa whispered urgently to him, as if she were preparing him for a final march. He recalled overhearing Snape make the unbreakable vow with her, promising to protect Draco and complete his task if he failed. These were not childish fancies, these were warnings loud as bells. Yet even then Harry's trust stopped short of the people who could have acted. He wanted to prove it himself, as though his word would not be enough until the evidence was dragged into the open. The irony was brutal. Dumbledore already knew. He had pieced together Draco's mission, had watched from the shadows, had chosen to let Draco stumble through his terrible task, because it revealed Voldemort's desperation. McGonagall, too, could have kept Draco under closer watch if Harry had gone to her with every detail, the disappearing acts, the whispering in the corridors, the sickness that left Malfoy pale and exhausted. But Harry's pride, and perhaps his distrust of authority, convinced him otherwise. He believed that Dumbledore was too busy and that McGonagall would dismiss his fears. The result was silence, and silence became complicity in the unfolding disaster. The mystery consumed Harry's days. He tried following Draco through the castle, slipping under the invisibility cloak like a hunter shadowing prey. In one tense scene, he followed Malfoy to Borgin and Burke's and watched him threaten the shopkeeper. "I will have it fixed," Draco hissed, his voice full of venom Harry had never heard before. It was about the vanishing cabinet, though Harry could not piece the puzzle together. Here was evidence, direct and undeniable, that Draco was tied to dark magic. And yet Harry still chose secrecy. He took his suspicions back to Ron and Hermione, back to private arguments in the common room, never upward to the people who held real power. The result of that secrecy was not victory, but near tragedy. On the night when Death Eaters finally invaded Hogwarts, it was too late. Draco had mended the vanishing cabinet, the link between the hidden room and Borgin and Burke's. Through it poured the followers of Voldemort, armed and merciless. The school, which might have been guarded more tightly had Dumbledore been warned, became a battlefield. Harry watched in horror as spells flew, as the chaos he had dreaded finally unfolded. If he had spoken sooner, if he had put aside his determination to be the lone investigator, perhaps the ending of that year would have been written differently. The duel in the bathroom was the sharpest warning. Malfoy, cornered, drew his wand, and Harry lashed back with Sectum Sempra, a curse he barely understood. Blood poured, Draco collapsed, and for a brief, sickening moment, Harry thought he might have killed him. This was no longer a game of suspicion and spying. This was life and death, bleeding out on the tiles of a Hogwarts lavatory. And still, Harry did not confide in McGonagall. He endured Snape's fury, endured the shame of his own recklessness, and carried the weight of his choices deeper into the year. Dumbledore, frail and dying, had spent the year giving Harry lessons in Voldemort's past, preparing him for the final battle. In those moments, Harry may have believed that bringing up Draco would distract from the greater war, but the truth was that Voldemort had sent his servant into the very heart of Hogwarts, and Harry had front-row seats to the warning signs. When Dumbledore asked, "Anything else you wish to share?" Harry held back. He kept his silence, and the silence grew into a scream on the astronomy tower. On that tower, Draco revealed himself at last. His wand shook as he aimed it at Dumbledore. "You haven't got long. I've fixed it. It's ready," he said, confessing the truth of the vanishing cabinet, the mission to kill. Tears streamed down his face as he admitted he could not do it. But the damage was already done. The Death Eaters were inside, Snape stood in the shadows, and the path to tragedy lay wide open. Harry, petrified and invisible, watched the scene he had feared unfold in exact detail. Every suspicion had been true, and yet none of his warnings had reached the people who could have changed the outcome. It is worth remembering that Harry had always had a streak of defiance. From the first year when he and Hermione went after the Philosopher's Stone without telling teachers, to the night in the Chamber of Secrets when he faced the basilisk alone, Harry had built his legend on acting without adult intervention. Sometimes this independence saved the day, but in sixth year that same habit blinded him. He believed he was the only one willing to see Malfoy's guilt, and so he carried it like a solitary burden. That decision cost him the chance to prevent Dumbledore's death, cost the school its innocence, and gave Voldemort the opening he craved. Malfoy himself was a tragic mirror in this story. He was not the villain Harry imagined, but a boy consumed by fear, trying desperately to carry out a task beyond his strength. Had Harry gone to Dumbledore with compassion rather than suspicion, perhaps the school could have offered Draco a way out. Instead, Draco's suffering remained hidden until the breaking point. Harry's silence not only endangered Hogwarts but also deepened Malfoy's isolation, leaving him trapped in the same web Harry was trying to expose. Even Hermione's cautionary words came back like an echo of wisdom ignored. "You've got a fixation with Malfoy," she said more than once. She wanted Harry to let it go, or at least to treat it with reason rather than obsession. But obsession defined his sixth year. Every glimpse of Malfoy in a corridor, every shadowy meeting, every pallid look at the Slytherin table became fuel for Harry's certainty. And though he was right in the end, being right was not enough. Being right too late is another form of being wrong. When the smoke cleared and Dumbledore lay dead, the true tragedy of Harry's silence revealed itself. He had been given the pieces of the puzzle, he had assembled them with startling clarity, and yet he had refused to share the picture. His distrust of authority, his desire to prove himself, his instinct to act alone. These were strengths in some battles, but here they turned to weakness. Draco's mission was not just a private war between two school rivals, it was a threat to Hogwarts itself, and Harry, by holding back, had helped let the threat blossom. The lesson embedded in this story is sharper than any curse. Even heroes need help. Even the bravest must sometimes lay down their pride and trust others. Harry's failure to confide in Dumbledore or McGonagall was not a failure of intelligence, but a failure of humility. In choosing to fight alone, he lost the chance to stop what became one of the darkest nights in Hogwarts history. And though he would later rise to defeat Voldemort, the shadow of that silence on the Astronomy Tower would forever remind him of the cost of carrying a burden alone. Number 22, Snape's final revelations. In the very last moments of Severus Snape's life, as his black eyes dimmed and Harry Potter leaned closer to catch his words, there was a weight in the air that could not be undone. Snape gave him memories, not explanations, not a dialogue, but fragments of truth preserved in silver strands. Only after that night, in the Pensive, did Harry realize that the man he despised had been guarding him, that his mother's eyes haunted Snape's every act, and that his own life was tied to a secret plan orchestrated by Albus Dumbledore. But the striking question remains, why did Harry never demand these truths earlier? He had many opportunities, many moments when a single question could have forced light into the shadows. Yet he remained silent, and that silence carried a cost measured in lives and sacrifices. Consider Harry's relationship with Snape throughout the years. From their very first potions lesson, Snape's hostility painted the man in the darkest possible colors. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he had sneered, and then humiliated Harry with questions no first year could have answered. Harry, in turn, responded with mistrust, with resentment that only deepened as Snape deducted points and mocked him mercilessly. By the time the war with Voldemort reached its peak, Harry's image of Snape was sealed, cruel, unfair, and a servant of the Dark Lord. This hardened perception kept him from ever considering Snape as someone from whom to seek help, even when questions burned inside him. He assumed Snape would never give a true answer. And yet, Snape held the answers that no one else could provide. The irony is cruel when one recalls Dumbledore's office in The Half-Blood Prince. Harry was furious, demanding to know why Draco Malfoy had been given so much leeway. He demanded action, proof, explanations. Yet he never demanded the same of Snape, though Snape's actions were far more mysterious and suspicious. In fact, when Snape made the unbreakable vow to Narcissa Malfoy in the opening chapters of that book, Harry only learned of it later through overheard whispers. Even then, he did not storm into the headmaster's office to demand clarity. His questions remained private, trapped inside his suspicions. That silence ensured that when the moment of revelation came, it was not through dialogue, but through a man's dying breath. Harry's habit of not asking questions extended beyond Snape. With Dumbledore himself, the silence is almost unbearable in hindsight. Dumbledore guided him, protected him, even confided fragments of truth, but Harry never pressed hard when he should have. In The Half-Blood Prince, after they returned from the cave where the locket Horcrux had been hidden, Dumbledore was at his weakest, poisoned by the potion he had drunk. Harry was desperate to save him, but he never demanded an answer about why these Horcruxes were so crucial, why Harry's connection to Voldemort mattered so deeply. "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more," Dumbledore once told him. But Harry did not ask what that meant for his own fate. When Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower, Harry was left with only fragments, pieces of a puzzle that Snape alone could complete. Even Fawkes, the Phoenix, stood as a symbol Harry could have leaned on. The bird's loyalty to Dumbledore was unquestionable, and Harry had seen its tears heal wounds and its song bring courage. After Dumbledore's death, Fawkes sang a lament and vanished, but before that, Harry never considered reaching out to this creature that embodied Dumbledore's legacy. He never asked if the Phoenix could carry a message, or if it could reveal some fragment of the headmaster's final intentions. The magical world is full of mysteries, yet Harry confined himself to silence, waiting for truths to arrive instead of demanding them. Snape's memories revealed not just the strategy of war, but also the depth of human emotion that had driven him. "Look at me," were his final words, demanding that Harry see Lily's eyes, the eyes that had shaped every choice Snape had made since her death. In the pensive, Harry saw the boy who had once loved Lily Evans, the man who had begged Dumbledore to keep her safe, the spy who lived a double life for years. More than that, he saw the crushing truth that he himself was the final Horcrux, that Dumbledore had known all along that Harry would have to die at Voldemort's hand. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment?" Snape had asked, and Dumbledore had not denied it. This was not just strategy. This was destiny revealed too late. Imagine the alternative. If Harry had pressed Snape during their lessons in occlumency, if he had forced Snape to explain the strange visions of Voldemort, or if he had cornered him after Dumbledore's death, demanding to know the truth. It is unlikely Snape would have opened his heart willingly, but Harry's demand might have broken the wall earlier. Even if Snape refused, the attempt could have planted seeds of doubt, of recognition that there was more to this man than hatred. Instead, Harry waited until the moment was almost gone, until Snape's blood was staining the floor of the shrieking shack. The tragedy is that Harry's silence also shaped his own suffering. Throughout the Deathly Hallows, he wandered with Hermione and Ron, struggling to understand Dumbledore's cryptic clues, burdened by half-truths and incomplete knowledge. He argued with Ron, doubted Hermione, and felt lost. At Godric's Hollow, when he stood before his parents' graves, he longed for answers, but again he kept those longings to himself. The man who might have explained the truth, Snape, was alive then, just a castle away, but unreachable in Harry's mind. Silence created an invisible wall, and behind that wall lay the answers that could have eased his torment. What makes this silence so haunting is how often Harry did the opposite with his friends. With Ron and Hermione he argued, questioned, and debated endlessly. He pushed back when Hermione doubted the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. He demanded Ron's loyalty when it wavered. He constantly pressed Sirius for stories of his father, for guidance, for answers. But with the two figures who carried the most dangerous truths, Dumbledore and Snape, his voice faltered. He accepted evasions, half-answers, silences. The boy who was brave enough to face a basilisk, a dragon, and the Dark Lord himself was not brave enough to demand the full truth from those who owed it to him. The cost of that silence can be measured in lives. Had Harry known earlier that he carried a piece of Voldemort's soul, perhaps Fred Weasley would not have fallen in the Battle of Hogwarts. Perhaps Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks might have survived if the plan had been clearer, the battle shorter. Knowledge is a weapon, and Harry was denied it not only by Dumbledore's choice, but also by his own refusal to press for it. In war, hesitation kills, and in Harry's silence there was hesitation that spread far beyond himself. There is a strange irony in the fact that Voldemort himself never hesitated to demand knowledge. He sought it obsessively, from the diary of Tom Riddle to the study of Horcruxes, asking, reading, prying open every locked door. His evil was fueled by insatiable curiosity. Harry, by contrast, who represented the opposite force, often shied away from such demands, waiting for truths to find him. This difference defined them as much as their choices did. One devoured knowledge for power, the other resisted knowledge for fear of what it might mean. Yet in the end, Harry needed that knowledge to finish the war, and he found it only at the brink of death. The revelation in the Pensieve is one of the most dramatic examples in all of literature of delayed truth. As Harry saw Snape's memories, the narrative shifted, and suddenly the years of hatred crumbled into a story of sacrifice. The boy who once shouted that Snape was a coward now saw him as a man of unbearable courage. But what is courage if it is revealed only after the chance to act together has passed? The tragedy is doubled because Snape himself wanted Harry to know. Every glance at Lily's eyes, every hidden act of protection, every dangerous decision whispered that truth. And yet Harry never asked. Even when facing his death in the Forbidden Forest, Harry walked with knowledge that felt incomplete. He accepted his fate, but he did so only because Snape's memories had finally revealed the truth. "I'm about to die," he thought, and for once he knew exactly why. But had he demanded that truth earlier, perhaps he could have faced his journey with greater clarity, less despair, and more control over the path that lay before him. This single case, the revelation of Snape's memories, is a portrait of silence and its price. It shows that bravery is not only in dueling with Death Eaters or standing alone against Voldemort, it is also in asking questions when answers are hidden. Harry's failure to demand the truth left him vulnerable, blind to the forces shaping his destiny. The boy who lived became the boy who waited, and waiting cost him more than he ever realized. Snape's dying gift was the truth, but by then the truth came too late to save the man who gave it. Number 23, The Broken Wand. Of all the dangerous situations Harry Potter faced during the Second Wizarding War, few moments carried as much quiet dread as the night his wand snapped in two. It happened in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows after a frantic escape from Voldemort and his followers at Godric's Hollow. Hermione's quick spell had saved them, but the price was the destruction of the wand Harry had carried since the first day he stepped into Ollivanders. Rowling describes the scene with painful simplicity. Harry bent down and picked up the pieces of his wand. He felt a terrible hollow inside him. Something was gone forever. In that instant, readers understood the gravity of his loss. A wizard without a proper wand was almost defenseless, and Harry, already hunted and outnumbered, had been reduced to a state of terrifying vulnerability. The strange thing is not that the wand broke. It is that Harry did so little to remedy the situation afterward. From the very beginning of Deathly Hallows, he had been warned that the world was growing darker and less forgiving. Every duel, every ambush demanded speed and precision. Yet Harry, who had always relied on his wand as both weapon and lifeline, accepted his broken wand as a kind of permanent punishment. He carried the useless pieces with him, but never pressed Hermione, Ron, or any of their allies to help him find a replacement. Even when they later reunited with Ollivander, the most skilled wand-maker in Britain, Harry did not ask if anything could be done. This silence is one of the strangest decisions he makes in the entire series. The contrast is even sharper when remembering Harry's first meeting with Ollivander in Philosopher's Stone. Ollivander spoke of wands as living extensions of their owners. He explained that the bond between wizard and wand was mysterious but vital, and Harry learned early on that his holly and phoenix feather wand had chosen him for a reason. That bond had seen him through years of danger, from duels with Death Eaters to the graveyard in Little Hangleton. When such a wand breaks, most witches and wizards would immediately seek expert guidance. Harry, however, merely tucked the pieces away. He mourned the loss, but his response was passive. It was almost as if he was resigned to weakness rather than willing to fight for a solution. Hermione herself noticed the gravity of the situation, yet her efforts were limited to small acts of practicality. She tried a mending charm, whispering reparo over the snapped pieces, but the result was failure. The wand remained useless, its magic irreparably disrupted. Hermione then handed Harry her own wand for him to use temporarily, but anyone could see how awkward it was. Wands do not respond well to borrowed masters, and Harry struggled to perform even the simplest spells. Rowling emphasizes this difficulty. Harry's spells seemed feeble and awkward with Hermione's wand. The reader cannot help but wonder why he did not demand more. Was he too proud, too afraid of distracting his friends from the larger mission? Or did the weight of prophecy make him believe that even this loss had to be endured in silence? The broken wand forced Harry into an almost constant state of disadvantage. In Malfoy Manor, when they were captured by Snatchers, he could barely defend himself. It was Hermione's quick thinking and Dobby's intervention that saved them, not Harry's own ability with borrowed magic. His dependence on others grew, but still he remained silent about seeking a real solution. Even when Bill and Fleur sheltered them at Shell Cottage, Harry had a brief chance to speak with Ollivander, who was weak but conscious. That moment was perhaps the clearest opportunity he would ever have to ask whether broken wands could be repaired or replaced with something equally powerful. Yet Harry did not ask. He seemed content to carry on with whatever fate threw at him. This refusal becomes even more puzzling when compared with his allies' resourcefulness. Hermione, for example, went to extraordinary lengths to prepare for their mission, packing the enchanted beaded bag with supplies and researching spells. Ron, for all his flaws, repeatedly urged caution and sought strategies for survival. Even minor characters like Dean Thomas, when on the run, carried whatever magical tools they could find. Harry's broken wand, by contrast, symbolized not preparation but surrender. He clung to its shattered remains like a talisman, but refused to consider practical steps. This choice almost cost them their lives on multiple occasions. What makes the situation so ironic is that Harry eventually became master of the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in history. But this happened by accident, not by design. He disarmed Draco Malfoy, unknowingly winning the allegiance of the Elder Wand long before he ever held it. The irony here is bitter. Harry accepted weeks of helplessness when, in truth, he could have at least tried to improve his circumstances. He might not have obtained the Elder Wand sooner, but he could have possessed a functional replacement, something to give him a fighting chance. Instead, he wandered through forests and hideouts with an ineffective tool, endangering himself and his mission. One possible explanation is Harry's psychology. Throughout the series, he develops a pattern of carrying burdens alone. From refusing to tell Dumbledore about his scar pain in Chamber of Secrets, to hiding the prophecy information in Order of the Phoenix, Harry often withholds his struggles from those who could help. Part of this stems from his childhood with the Dursleys, where asking for help brought only ridicule or punishment. Part of it comes from his internal belief that he must shoulder danger to protect others. Thus, when his wand broke, Harry may have instinctively assumed that the loss was his alone to endure. Asking for help would have seemed like weakness, even if common sense demanded it. Rowling also uses the broken wand as a metaphor for Harry's internal despair. At that point in the story, he had lost Dumbledore, was hunted by Death Eaters, and felt unsure of the Horcrux mission. The broken wand mirrored his broken hope. He clung to the fragments not because they were useful, but because they represented the boy he once was, the boy who had always survived with that particular wand. The reluctance to replace it was tied to his fear of moving forward without guidance. In this light, Harry's silence is less a mistake and more a symptom of grief. Still, the practical consequences cannot be ignored. There is also the matter of pride. Harry had always been defined by his independence in dueling. His Patronus had stunned crowds. His spellcasting had saved lives. To admit he was crippled without his wand would have been to admit fragility. Even with Ron and Hermione by his side, Harry could not bring himself to confess that he was nearly powerless. Pride, combined with fatalism, produced paralysis. He fought on with borrowed magic and blind faith, hoping destiny would somehow compensate for his inadequacy. And astonishingly, destiny did, but readers are left uneasy, knowing it might easily have gone another way. The importance of this oversight is highlighted when one remembers that wands could be swapped or stolen throughout the series. Draco, for example, used hawthorn wood with a unicorn hair core. Bellatrix Lestrange wielded her walnut wand with cruelty. Even in desperate times, wands changed hands and survival demanded adaptability. Harry, however, treated his broken holly wand as irreplaceable until fate placed the elder wand in his path. This rigidity is striking because it contrasts with the flexibility that had defined his survival before. He once outwitted dragons, trolls, and Death Eaters through improvisation, yet he froze. Critics have argued that this moment shows Harry's deep dependence on external forces rather than his own initiative. He was rescued by Dobby at Malfoy Manor, carried forward by Hermione's plans, and ultimately empowered by the Elder Wand's allegiance, something he neither sought nor controlled. Had Harry asked Ollivander, or even sought refuge among the Order of the Phoenix, to acquire another wand, he might have regained some agency. Instead, his path to Voldemort became more a matter of luck and prophecy than deliberate choice. It was bravery, yes, but also passivity. Readers often overlook how close Harry came to death during this period. With an unreliable wand, his duel against Voldemort in the forest would have been suicide, if not for the Elder Wand's hidden allegiance. Even earlier, in confrontations with Snatchers and Death Eaters, he relied on allies more than his own diminished abilities. The broken wand is not just a detail of plot, it is the symbol of how precarious his survival truly was. By refusing to seek help, Harry magnified his peril. The story invites reflection on what might have been. Imagine Harry pressing Ollivander at Shell Cottage or even seeking assistance from wand-makers abroad. Imagine him crafting a temporary solution with the knowledge of older wizards like Lupin or McGonagall, had they been alive and free to help. These options were not impossible, but Harry's silence made them vanish before they were ever considered. It is a haunting what-if that lingers in the margins of the narrative, reminding readers that even heroes sometimes fail to take the simplest steps to protect themselves. In the end, the Broken Wand episode reveals both Harry's flaws and his extraordinary fortune. He should have asked for help, but he did not. He should have sought solutions, but he surrendered to fate. That he survived at all was due less to planning and more to chance, circumstance, and the strange workings of wand law. The lesson hidden in this episode is simple but profound. Even the bravest of wizards sometimes stumble, not because of the enemy's strength, but because of their own silence in the face of need. And Harry's silence over his broken wand remains one of the most striking examples of this truth in the entire saga. Number 24. Keeping Horcruxes from Ron and Hermione. Harry Potter's greatest flaw, the one that often endangered his closest friendships, was his stubborn refusal to share burdens that clearly were too heavy for him alone. Nowhere is this clearer than in the matter of the Horcruxes. Although Albus Dumbledore revealed their existence to him during his 6th year, Harry clung to this information with a sense of secrecy that verged on destructive. His instinct was always to keep things bottled inside, even when his best friends Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger had already proven countless times that they were not only willing to help, but capable of it. When Harry chose not to tell them the full truth right away, he unknowingly planted the seeds of distrust that would later bloom into painful tension during their journey across the English countryside. Dumbledore had trusted Harry with a mission unlike any other. In Half-Blood Prince, their meetings were filled with hints, fragments, and scattered pieces of knowledge about Voldemort's past. Harry was told of the objects Voldemort had torn his soul into: the diary destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets, the ring that Dumbledore himself had shattered, the locket, the cup, and the serpent Nagini. Yet Harry did not relay these revelations with full transparency to his companions. He believed, perhaps subconsciously, that this responsibility was his alone. It was, he thought, the kind of secret Dumbledore would expect him to guard, Rowling writes. That one line illustrates how deeply Harry had internalized the notion that silence equaled loyalty. He failed to realize that secrecy toward his friends was not protection, but a wedge. The cost of this decision became evident when the trio set out after Dumbledore's death. They knew vaguely what they were seeking, but their knowledge was fragmented. Ron, particularly, felt frustrated by Harry's half-truths and assumptions. In Deathly Hallows, Ron lashes out in the tent, feeling that Harry is not telling us everything. This accusation cut deep because it was true. Harry had delayed confiding in them about the Horcruxes, and though he eventually shared more details, by that time the lack of clarity had already bred resentment. When Ron abandoned them in the forest, it was not simply out of hunger, fear, or the locket's curse, but also because he felt excluded from Harry's trust. The secrecy had festered until it turned into isolation. One cannot ignore Hermione's position in this conflict. Hermione had been, from the very beginning, the voice urging Harry to prepare properly, to read, to think before acting. Had Harry told her everything that Dumbledore had shared about Horcruxes, she could have begun her research months earlier. Instead, she pieced together fragments, trying desperately to understand, while Harry kept the central truth locked away. But it all comes down to this: if Dumbledore wanted to tell me more, he would have, Harry insists at one point, closing the subject with finality. That statement not only frustrated Hermione, but denied her the opportunity to offer what she did best: clarity and foresight. Harry's protective silence stripped her of agency, reducing her to a follower rather than a planner. The irony lies in the fact that Ron and Hermione were not merely companions. They were integral to the success of the mission. Without Hermione's quick thinking, they would never have retrieved the locket from Umbridge. Without Ron's sudden courage, the sword of Gryffindor would not have saved Harry from drowning under the frozen pool. These moments underscore the futility of Harry's secrecy. The mission was never his alone. It demanded the loyalty and talents of all three, woven together. But by holding back crucial details at the outset, Harry weakened that bond. At precisely the moment they needed it most, this flaw was not born overnight. From his earliest years at Hogwarts, Harry had carried a dangerous tendency to take everything upon himself. He believed that if he involved others, he would endanger them more. When the Triwizard Tournament revealed its deadly stakes, Harry tried to push away offers of help, even though his survival depended on allies. In Order of the Phoenix, he withdrew from his friends after Cedric's death, convinced no one could understand. This pattern carried into the Horcrux mission. Harry convinced himself that solitude equaled safety, failing to see that isolation was, in truth, the greatest danger of all. The cracks in their unity showed during the months of wandering in the wilderness. Rowling paints a grim picture of freezing nights, empty stomachs, and the oppressive weight of failure. Ron, his temper inflamed by the cursed locket, accused Harry of treating the mission like a vague riddle with no plan. The anger was born not merely from hunger or fear, but from the feeling of exclusion, the sense that Harry knew more than he was admitting. Harry's earlier silence now bore its bitter fruit. "You don't know what you're doing, do you?" Ron spat, a line that carried not only frustration, but a demand for honesty. That confrontation could have been avoided if Harry had trusted them from the very beginning. Hermione's loyalty during that period makes the secrecy even more painful. She chose to stay when Ron walked out, but even she was not immune to doubt. Her silence, her tension, and her exhausted patience were signs that Harry's withholding of information had burdened her as well. She was left to decipher Dumbledore's clues with fragments, struggling to bridge the gap between what Harry knew and what he refused to share. It was unfair to her, as it was to Ron, because both had pledged their lives to this mission. Trust was the only currency they had, and Harry spent it carelessly. The clearest evidence of how destructive secrecy could be comes when Ron returns. In the raw moment of reconciliation, Ron admits that wearing the locket magnified his fears of being excluded, of being the outsider. "I thought you knew more than you were telling us," he confesses. The weight of those words cannot be overstated. Ron's insecurity was sharpened by Harry's earlier choice to conceal. The idea that Harry carried secrets even from his closest friends nearly broke the trio forever. This shows that the consequences of silence are not abstract, they manifest as fractured trust and broken loyalty. Had Harry told Ron and Hermione everything at once, every detail about Voldemort's Horcruxes, every memory Dumbledore had shown him, the mission would have begun with far greater unity. Hermione would have mapped out research strategies, Ron would have felt trusted and valued, and Harry would have been free from the crushing loneliness that haunted him. Instead, the journey was tainted by suspicion and emotional wounds. They succeeded not because Harry's secrecy was justified, but in spite of it. Their victory is proof of resilience, not of strategy. What makes this mistake so compelling is that it reveals Harry's humanity. He was not the perfect leader, not the infallible chosen one. He was a teenager thrust into impossible circumstances, who believed that protecting his friends meant keeping them in the dark. This error is painfully relatable because many readers recognize the instinct to shield loved ones by withholding the truth. Yet the novels remind us that secrecy rarely protects, it corrodes. Harry's silence about the Horcruxes is a timeless lesson in the dangers of pride and mistrust. Even Dumbledore, in his wisdom, bore some responsibility for this cycle of secrecy. He had trained Harry to guard information jealously, urging him not to confide too easily. Harry absorbed this lesson to such a degree that he failed to distinguish between caution and mistrust. The line blurred until even Ron and Hermione, who had faced death beside him, were left in shadow. Dumbledore's own words, "I am not worried, Harry, I am with you," suggested faith in Harry's choices. Yet that trust perhaps pressured Harry to maintain silence, as if speaking openly would betray the faith of his mentor. By the time Harry fully trusted Ron and Hermione with the truth, damage had already been done. Their loyalty carried them through the darkest moments, but the cracks never fully vanished. The journey in the tent, the bitterness of Ron's departure, the weariness in Hermione's eyes, all of it could have been avoided had Harry chosen openness over pride. The secrecy about Horcruxes nearly destroyed what Voldemort could not, the unity of friendship that had always been Harry's greatest weapon. The story of Harry withholding the truth about the Horcruxes resonates because it illuminates the cost of silence within friendship. It is a cautionary tale nestled within the larger epic of good versus evil. Harry's decision to bear the secret alone was not the triumph of a noble hero, but the mistake of a young man still learning the value of trust. In the end, his friends did not abandon him forever. They returned, they forgave, and they fought beside him until the end. But their story reminds us that even the chosen one was not immune to the pitfalls of pride and secrecy, and that honesty, however difficult, is often the only path to unity. Number 25. The Elder Wand in Voldemort's Hands. When Albus Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower on that fateful night, Harry Potter inherited not only grief but also a dangerous void of guidance. The one wizard who seemed to anticipate every move of Voldemort was gone, and with him vanished the careful strategies and knowledge that Harry had relied upon. Yet within those last months of the war, rumours of a legendary wand, older than Hogwarts itself and supposedly undefeatable, began to spread like wildfire. Harry heard whispers of it, and fragments of stories reached his ears, but he chose silence. He did not tell the Order of the Phoenix. He did not confide in Ron or Hermione beyond vague mentions. And because of that silence, the Elder Wand slipped into Voldemort's hand without resistance, giving the Dark Lord the one weapon that should never have been his. The Elder Wand was not just another magical artifact. According to the tale of the three brothers, it was created by Death himself. Gregorovitch, Grindelwald, and Dumbledore all held it before, and its trail of blood was well known. Dumbledore himself had confided in Harry about Grindelwald, and even left traces of this past through Rita Skeeter's scandalous biography. Harry pieced the story together slowly, but never fully grasped that the wand in Dumbledore's possession had been the Elder Wand. When he did begin to understand, he kept it locked inside his own thoughts, perhaps from fear of sounding paranoid, or perhaps from a stubborn desire to solve the mystery alone. In that secrecy lay the seed of Voldemort's triumph. Voldemort's obsession with power was not hidden. From the moment he stole the locket of Salazar Slytherin as a boy, he hungered for domination. The Elder Wand was to him the ultimate prize, and he scoured the continent searching for its previous owners. When Harry read in The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore that Grindelwald had once sought the wand, the warning bells should have rung louder than ever. Harry should have turned to Remus Lupin, Minerva McGonagall, or even to Aberforth Dumbledore, who later proved willing to share guarded truths. Instead, he carried the suspicion in silence, while Voldemort pieced the puzzle together with terrifying efficiency. The choice not to speak cannot be dismissed as mere forgetfulness. Harry had seen the Elder Wand in action when Dumbledore fought Voldemort at the Ministry. It was a duel so dazzling that even hardened aurors admitted they had never seen magic like it. Harry had witnessed the stream of fire that became a serpent, the shimmering shield that repelled the killing curse, and the commanding calm in Dumbledore's hand. Dumbledore had not lost to Voldemort. He had only delayed him, Harry recalled. It should have been obvious that the wand Dumbledore carried was extraordinary. Yet, after Dumbledore's death, Harry treated the matter like another burden to shoulder quietly, repeating the same pattern of isolation that had haunted him since childhood. Had Harry confided in Ron or Hermione early, their research instincts would have ignited. Hermione had already uncovered obscure details about the Deathly Hallows once Xenophilius Lovegood mentioned them. Ron, for all his doubts, understood wizarding legends better than Harry. Having grown up in a family steeped in folklore, the trio could have strategized, they could have warned the Order, they could have set traps to keep Voldemort from desecrating Dumbledore's tomb. Instead, Voldemort broke into the white marble grave, shattered its defenses, and claimed the Elder Wand in an act so grotesque that it seemed to mock the very idea of resting in peace. The book describes that moment with chilling simplicity. And he laughed, a high, cold laugh that echoed off the walls, and he lifted the wand and pointed it at the sky. It was the sound of triumph. Voldemort believed he had conquered destiny. He thought the most powerful wand in the world would now obey him. And why would it not? He had murdered to get it. He had desecrated to claim it. He had held it aloft like a trophy. To Voldemort, possession was all that mattered. But it was Harry's silence that allowed that possession to happen uncontested. Harry had been told time and again that he could not win alone. Dumbledore reminded him that trust was his greatest strength. Sirius told him that his friends were his family. Lupin emphasized that the bonds of love were his weapon. And yet Harry clung to secrecy, perhaps shaped by the Dursleys' years of teaching him that vulnerability invited punishment. When he saw the symbol of the Deathly Hallows carved into Xenophilius Lovegood's necklace, he dismissed it as eccentricity. When he heard fragments of the wand's tale, he withheld his suspicion. What he did not realize was that Voldemort's spies and agents were not hesitating at all. They were gathering every scrap of information, every whisper, every clue. There is a striking moment later in the story when Ollivander, trembling and frail after his imprisonment, reveals to Harry that wands have allegiance. "The wand chooses the wizard," he whispered. Harry learned then that power was not a matter of mere possession. Yet that revelation came too late. Voldemort already wielded the Elder Wand, and though its loyalty lay elsewhere, it was still an instrument of deadly force in his hands. Harry had waited until crisis to understand what he might have prevented if he had shared his fears earlier. Some might argue that Harry's secrecy was born of caution. The Order had already been infiltrated. Trust was dangerous when spies and traitors lurked. But even within the circle of Ron and Hermione, the two people who had proven loyalty beyond doubt, Harry hesitated. This hesitation was costly. They discovered the truth about the Deathly Hallows piecemeal, running behind Voldemort rather than ahead of him. It was as though they were always one step too late, the narrative suggests, and indeed, it was Harry's silence that made them reactive instead of proactive. Voldemort's triumph with the Elder Wand almost broke the final battle before it began. He strutted through the forbidden forest and across the grounds of Hogwarts, believing himself invincible. His followers roared their allegiance, emboldened by the sight of that pale hand wrapped around the wand of legend. Students and professors alike trembled, wondering how they could resist when the Dark Lord carried the weapon of death itself. In that moment, Harry's private fear became everyone's terror. The consequence of silence had become collective despair. It is important to remember that the wand never truly belonged to Voldemort. Its allegiance passed from Dumbledore not to the one who killed him, but to Draco Malfoy, who disarmed the headmaster moments before Snape delivered the killing blow. Later, Harry himself disarmed Draco at Malfoy Manor, unknowingly becoming the master of the Elder Wand. This irony saved the wizarding world. Yet the irony does not erase the risk. If Voldemort had succeeded in bending the wand's allegiance by force or by murder, Harry's silence would have doomed them all. Harry's failure to seek help in this matter echoes his earlier mistakes. He entered the Chamber of Secrets without consulting professors. He stormed into the Department of Mysteries driven by visions, ignoring warnings. He watched Cedric die in the graveyard after refusing to confide in Dumbledore about his dreams of Voldemort. Again and again, Harry's instinct was to bear burdens alone. With the Elder Wand, the pattern reached its most dangerous point. Only by sheer accident of Wandlore did the world escape destruction. The lesson buried in this story is not simply about strategy, but about the weight of silence. "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love," Dumbledore told him. Love required trust. Trust required sharing. By refusing to voice his fears, Harry nearly severed the chain of strength that bound him to his allies. The Elder Wand is remembered as Voldemort's downfall, but it should also be remembered as Harry's near-fatal mistake. He waited too long to speak, and by the time the truth was clear, the most feared wizard in history was brandishing death's own weapon. In hindsight, readers can trace the path like a trail of breadcrumbs, Each clue was there, each whisper available, each ally willing, and yet the boy who lived kept his voice silent until silence nearly killed them all. The Elder Wand was a weapon of legend, but the greater danger was the burden Harry refused to share. It was not Voldemort's laughter that almost sealed their fate, but Harry's silence. Number 26. The Bounty on His Head. The autumn of 1997 found Harry Potter hunted in a way he had never truly been before. The Triwizard Tournament had once turned him into a spectacle. The Chamber of Secrets incident had made him an object of suspicion, and the return of Voldemort had branded him as either liar or saviour, depending on who one asked. But now, in the pages of The Daily Prophet and in the proclamations of the Ministry under Death Eater control, Harry was no longer simply controversial, he was declared a fugitive. His name was linked with treachery, rebellion, and sedition, and his very face stared back at him from moving posters promising an immense reward to anyone who delivered him. Undesirable number 1 became more than just a label, it was a call to hunt. Yet in the midst of this suffocating pursuit, Harry did not reach out for help in the way one might expect. His instinct to shoulder burdens alone, a trait ingrained in him since boyhood, left him more isolated than ever, even as danger closed in. The Ministry's decrees were chilling in their precision. The bounty was not a minor threat. It represented both the desperation of the Death Eaters and the incentive for ordinary wizards to betray him. J.K. Rowling describes how the wizarding world seemed to shrink into a hostile place, even familiar alleys and villages now rife with suspicion. The poster showed a face he had seen 1,000 times before, but now slightly distorted by the cheap black-and-white print. Harry Potter, undesirable number 1. This phrase repeated itself in his mind, not just as an insult, but as a warning that he was truly prey. For any sensible fugitive, this would be the moment to consolidate alliances, to rely on every possible friend, and to make the resistance organized rather than fractured. Yet Harry did the opposite, pushing away those who might have offered guidance. Part of this tendency grew from his complex relationship with the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore's death had left the Order leaderless in more than just title. Remus Lupin, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Arthur Weasley were all devoted, but Harry's distrust of sharing too much information meant that their potential was wasted. When the trio embarked on their desperate journey to hunt Horcruxes, Harry withheld the full plan from even those who had pledged their lives to his. He could not tell them, Rowling writes, not without breaking Dumbledore's orders. Yet the irony is sharp. Dumbledore had emphasized trust and unity, but Harry interpreted secrecy as a greater virtue. The chaos that followed, with the Order struggling in the dark while the Ministry tightened its grip, reflected the cost of his silence. The weight of secrecy placed Harry into situations where asking for help might have saved lives. Take, for instance, the capture at Malfoy Manor. The trio's decision to wander without secure shelter left them vulnerable, and it was sheer chance, Dobby's intervention, that saved them from certain death. Had Harry chosen to involve the Order earlier, to coordinate safe houses or establish secure networks, the desperate scramble might not have been necessary. Hermione's brilliance and Ron's loyalty gave him formidable companions, but they were still only 3 young fugitives against the full machinery of Voldemort's regime. The wanted posters were not just a symbol. They actively inspired bounty hunters like the Snatchers who roamed the countryside with Ministry approval, motivated by the promise of gold. The fact that Harry nearly fell to such opportunists shows how thin his margin of survival was. One might argue that Harry's reluctance to seek help sprang from a fear of betrayal. After all, in a world where the Ministry itself had turned, who could be trusted? Yet this paranoia, understandable though it was, became self-defeating. Members of the Weasley family, for example, were targeted regardless of Harry's choices simply because of their loyalty. Lupin offered his support, though Harry rejected it during their heated argument, accusing him of cowardice when Lupin sought escape from his personal struggles. This clash reveals how Harry's instinct to rebuke and isolate, rather than accept aid, sometimes bordered on reckless pride. He feared endangering others, yet his rejection of Lupin meant losing a skilled fighter at a time when the balance of power could not afford such losses. The bounty on his head amplified the danger for anyone who even spoke his name. Rowling notes how the taboo curse was placed on Voldemort's name itself, allowing Death Eaters to trace anyone who dared use it. This transformed conversations into traps, silencing the resistance and making secrecy an act of survival. For Harry, who had grown accustomed to saying the Dark Lord's name without fear, it became a liability. When the Snatchers captured the trio, it was precisely because Harry ignored the caution of others and used Voldemort instead of euphemisms. Here is a clear moment where reaching for guidance, listening to those more experienced in guerrilla resistance, might have prevented disaster. His headlong courage, so often celebrated, now directly endangered the mission. The posters themselves carried psychological weight. To see one's own face staring back from walls and lampposts is to feel stripped of anonymity. For Harry, this reinforced his lifelong sense of being watched and judged, but now with lethal stakes. Rowling captures the haunting imagery. Every corner of the wizarding world seemed to know his name, his scar, his reward. The public, driven by fear or greed, could at any moment turn hostile. Yet instead of using this to galvanize broader sympathy or appeal to those disillusioned by the regime, Harry remained focused inward, trusting only his small circle. The resistance thus remained fragmented, with groups like the Order, Dumbledore's army, and individuals like Aberforth Dumbledore working in parallel but without coordination.